We're almost ready to close out, but we're going to close out with something a little different. Up until now, we've been looking at almost everything through the lens of business. We've had a lot of CEOs up here, other business people, private capital people, all kinds of business-related people, and properly so. It makes sense for us to look at it that way. But right now, we're going to look at these issues through a completely different lens, and that's the lens of cats. Now, I'm not speaking metaphorically, I mean cats, big cats, not the kind you have around your house, big cats. Our final guest today is a zoologist, a conservationist, a field biologist, and he has made it his life's work to save the world's big cats. Alan Rabinowitz is Chief Executive Officer of Panthera, and he has actually some extraordinary stories to tell us. So please welcome Alan Rabinowitz.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I know you're all tired, but hopefully this will be a little more entertaining. And I will try to get across to you some very serious points as well while entertaining you. Usually when I talk about saving the world's big cats, it's always about the how do you do it. But I've been asked over the last year or so more and more whys, not just hows, but whys. Why does it matter? Why do you do it? Now, why does it matter is an important question, especially it was just brought up by the last panel, that people won't care about saving polar bears if they have health issues for their children or with themselves. That's absolutely true. But there is a why, there is a connection. It's not an either or. Then I'm often asked, why do I do it? Why do I do it, especially when people understand what my life's about and they realize it comes at great personal sacrifice? And that's how I'm going to start off this talk. Why do I do it? And it's not because I want you to stare at a picture of me as a child necessarily. It's because I think that the whys and that what drives certain people in order to do certain things, which might be underlying drivers with many of you in the audience today, is a key element of success. And that if you're trying to look for a metric to gauge whether somebody will succeed in whatever they do, I think you need to look at the whys behind that person. I was born a very, very serious stutterer. My stutter was so bad that I couldn't get out any words. The public school system in New York didn't know what to do with me at the time. They put me in special classes all the other kids called the retarded classes. So I just stopped even trying. I stopped talking to adults because adults couldn't see past the fact that even though I couldn't speak, that there was everything else normal inside of my head. But stutterers can do a lot of other things in terms of getting their speech out. And what I learned very early on is that I could speak to animals and not stutter, or not stutter too badly. So one of the things that my father did, realizing this, because at this time there were no computers, no way to find out about other systems or other forms of help, he would take me to the Bronx Zoo in New York City, which at the time had the great cat house, cage after cage after cage of big cats. And I would go up to those cages and I would talk to those big cats. Because what I realized as a child is that not only could I speak to them, but that they were like me. There was this energy, power, locked behind these bars for one reason and one reason only, because they didn't have a human voice. Simply because we couldn't understand them in our own language. We felt fine, as we do still today, about locking them away and treating them a certain way. This permeates everything about our relationship with wildlife, whether you realize it or not. Just the fact that they do not have a human voice, regardless of their consciousness. One of the things I did as a child, without ever realizing if I ever would overcome or be able to control my stutter, was that I promised those cats, I actually did every time I met them, that if I ever did overcome my stutter or could get things across, I would try to be their voice, because they had helped me so much as a child. Well, that happened. That happened. It was a long, torturous process. I'm not going to explain how it happened, but realizing that I wanted to try to be a voice for animals while running away from human beings as far and as fast as I could, I ended up studying wildlife biology, getting my PhD in wildlife biology. And those circumstances took me on a path that led me to be asked right after I got my PhD by a man who became my mentor, Dr. George Schaller, to go to a little-known country named Belize. This is in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a country which nobody had ever heard of because it had been British Honduras until 1979, 1980, and to try to do what nobody else had ever done before. Study an animal we knew absolutely nothing about. Less was known about jaguars than any of the large cats. See if I could try to capture them, do science on them in the rainforest, in the jungles of Belize. Well, I loved that challenge, and I took it on, because the more I could get away from human beings, didn't have to talk, the more humans said I couldn't do something, the more I would try to do it. So I did. And I spent 4 years down in the jungles of Belize capturing, learning how to capture, because nobody knew how to do it at the time. People knew how to kill them, but not how to capture them alive. Capture them, drugging them, radio collaring them, setting them back free, and doing all the science. When my work was over 4 years later, the New York Zoological Society at the Bronx Zoo, who I worked for at the time, said that, okay, now I could go on to something else, but I wouldn't do it. I said, no, these animals need a home. There is no jaguar preserve. There's no home for this species. So I spent an extra year there with the permission of the Zoological Society, and I set up the world's first jaguar preserve, first and only jaguar preserve in Belize. Still remains today the only protected area set up specifically for the survival of the jaguar. This was wonderful. I had found my calling. This was what my life would be all about. I could do this. I was good at this. I didn't have to talk to many human beings. I knew how to live and to work and study and to learn about animals in a way that I could help them have a voice. Try to then take that in the terms of scientific data to the outside world and try to make them understand, or at least governments. But I didn't want to stay on jaguars. So for the next nearly 2 decades, I ran as fast and as far as I could, trying to work on everything people said hadn't been done or couldn't be done. I followed mountain lions in the Pacific Northwest. I was the first person to do surveys on the clouded leopard in Malaysian Borneo and in Taiwan. I was the first one to capture and radio collar leopards, Asiatic leopards, in the jungles along the Thai-Burmese border. And I was the first one to do full surveys of the Indo-Chinese tigers. Nearly 20 years I spent working on these cats, setting up protected areas, tens of thousands of square miles of protected areas for these cats. And then as 1999 came close, as the beginning of the 21st century was about to be on us, what I realized more than anything is that I was failing, is that I was a failure. 20 plus years, and I was not doing what I had promised to do and what I wanted so badly to do, and that's save the cats. 20 plus years of roaming the wildest areas on Earth, setting up new protected areas from rainforests, montane areas, all the way up into the Himalayas for these animals, and we were losing. We were losing. All the big cat species were all in rapid decline. And I realized at that time that it was a problem of scale, that conservation was failing as a whole, and still is failing to a large extent, because scientists, conservationists often think too small. They don't ramp things up to the proper scale. Now, here we had the four largest cats in the world, all iconic species, species that you ask anyone about, and they will wax eloquently about them. Cultures will say these are a crucial part of our culture, but that didn't translate. They were all dying out. They were all being killed by the same people who waxed so eloquently about them. Tigers? Tigers, by the beginning of the 21st century, now it's even worse, were down to 7% of their historic range. 93%, it's actually more, of their range had been lost. Lions. People watch specials. People watch Animal Planet, think lions are doing wonderfully. But lions are doing terribly. Lions are down to probably, that's actually another optimistic view, 25%. It's probably more like 17, 18% of their historic range. There are only about 6 good lion populations left in the world. Jaguars? Jaguars better than others. Jaguars lost 60% of their historic range, and at the time, snow leopards, we had no idea. All we knew was that they were being killed from the skins coming out. One of the most magnificent species on Earth in some of the most remote areas on Earth, and we knew virtually nothing about it. The reasons were intuitively obvious, as well as obvious just to look out into the real world that we were faced with every day. Spiraling population growth, cities expanding uncontrolled into remaining forest areas, and the unsustainable use of resources in a way that looked as if it would never slow down and would never work. But there was another factor, a factor that most conservationists, most people don't often realize, and that's our disrespect of animals, a disrespect we carry with us to this day. Despite all the rhetoric, people basically don't treat animals very well, even our own pets. Why? Because they don't have a voice. Imagine how you might treat your dog if it actually talked to you in your voice and told you what it needed. Maybe you would pay for that $500 surgery instead of euthanizing it. We treated jaguars, we treated the big cats incredibly poorly, having no respect for them, doing anything we want with them. All these pictures are taken in the last few years. We kill them at will, we trade them, we chain them up. They're there for us, versus thinking that they are there as part of a green world, a wild world that we need. Now, why do we need it? So think about some of these facts, because I can't go into all of the details of the why. But these are not just little populations scattered throughout humankind. The 4 largest cats in the world roam over 15% of the terrestrial surface of the Earth. 15% of the human landscape. You add on 4 more of the largest cats, mountain lions, cheetahs, clouded leopards, and leopards. 35% of the terrestrial surface of the world are occupied by these cats. They not only live with us, they keep the environment, they keep all the other wildlife in balance, and without going into it, I'm going to tell you that when you make the analogy that why should we care about this when there are human health issues, these animals, these species, are some of the mitigators of our human health issues. These are the animals helping to keep a firewall up in place for many of the infectious diseases that are now spreading over into the human landscape and the re-emerging infectious diseases that are becoming a major, major issue. This is going to be the major health issue of the next few decades. And these infectious diseases, many of which are zoonotic, meaning they're originating in animals, are kept in balance, at least partially, by these large carnivores. There is a why. there is a reason to save, to care about your child with diabetes and to care about polar bears. Now, what I was doing just wasn't working. What all the conservation world was doing wasn't working. Setting up new parks, new protected areas, these were recreation spots. When I first set it up, ecotourism wasn't even a term. Now it is. Now it brings in funds. Is it saving species? Not really. It is not really. They're recreational zones. They're places, do people learn a lot from going to these places? Sometimes. Does it have lasting effects? Not really. I had to figure out a way, apart from what people were doing, I had to think outside the box, because my field is not trained to think outside the box very often. How could we save the jaguar? Despite all the protected areas, despite what we were trying to do, the jaguar was going downhill fast. So I thought I came up with almost an epiphany. I decided to do something no one else had done before. In 1999, I called together all the world's experts on jaguars. It wasn't many, about 3 dozen. And we had what was called a priority setting exercise, a range-wide priority setting exercise, where we would to determine where all the remaining jaguar populations were, and I was going to create a system, a program of triage, of trying to look at the most important jaguar populations throughout different parts of their geographic range and ecologically save the most important populations. I was a genius, I thought. I thought, this goes so far beyond anything anybody has done for a large carnivore species. This was earth-shattering. Boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I dumb. Now, through serendipity, at that same meeting, bringing together all the known data, all the experts on jaguars, it just so happened that we brought some geneticists to the table. Geneticists who were using new forensic DNA tools, DNA fingerprinting. And just at that time, in 1999-2000, had decided to look at some of these new genetic tools being used on humans for wildlife. And they had examined, just by chance, feces, fecal matter of jaguars from Mexico through Argentina. The results that they presented shocked me. It shocked me so much that I didn't believe it. I told them to go back and do it again. They did it again. And what they found was true. There were no subspecies of jaguars. There were no subspecies of jaguars. Jaguars from Mexico through the jaguars in Argentina were the same jaguar. Now, that may not sound like a lot to you. That bowled me over. This made the jaguar the only large mammal in the world with no racial variation, no true subspecies. How could that be? How could there be no true subspecies when there were just pockets of jaguars and humanity screwing up the world everywhere? It's because wildlife, again, if they could only talk to us, wildlife is so much more resilient. These big cats, jaguars in particular, are more resilient than we ever gave them credit for. Again, I was looking through the human lens instead of trying to get into their heads and look through their eyes. What jaguars were doing was land that I was seeing as wasteland, written off, non-jaguar world. They were moving through this. They were using these lands. They couldn't live here, but they were using them. These jaguars, they had created an underground railway where they could sneak through the human landscape using whatever possible. Now, lots of them would be killed. Most of them would be killed. But a few would make it. And genetically, all it took is a few. In fact, genetically, it only takes about 1 per generation to make it from one population to the next. And from Mexico to Argentina, it's not one jaguar moving that whole range. These jaguars, especially young male dispersers that had to get away from their family, just like young male kids, they were getting out. And they were swimming, they were moving, that switch went off saying, I gotta get out of home. And of course, it was paired, just like in humans, with the female saying, get the hell out of the house. They would chase them aggressively out, and a switch would go off, and those jaguars would move, sometimes hundreds of miles. Mountain lions move thousands. And they would get through the human landscape. Now, I'm not going to bore you or go through the details of what we did then, but what I realized is I had been way off. I hadn't even come close to thinking outside the box. The jaguars had shown me what the box really was. Somehow, I threw away everything I had thought. I threw away all the standard thinking in big carnivores in terms of connections, and I realized that the jaguars had created corridors between their protected areas, between where they lived, and we just had to find them. The genetics told us they existed, but we had to find them. So we did something called a cost dispersal analysis, where we just took all the parameters of what we know to be jaguar characteristics, of what they like using and moving through, and we created a new map of what the highest probability of what these jaguar areas were. The dark green areas are where jaguars actually live, usually the protected areas where they breed, their homes, and the light green, that was anything. That was cattle ranching, citrus, rice farms, rubber plantations, oil palm, anything. This was what jaguars were trying to make their way through. This was the first hope I had that big cats could live with people. What really scared me, what really depressed me and scared me was how we just weren't getting it in the wildlife conservation field. I was considered at the time, not bragging, but by everybody else, I was considered the world's expert on jaguars. And yet, this is how bad my mistake was. I was about to relegate the whole species to a triage system where I would relegate large populations to extinction, whereas the reality, what the jaguar was doing was this: enabling themselves to have a contiguous genetic range, which no animal had ever even done before. This threw everything out the window. There was no more triage, no more thoughts that anything is too small. A small habitat was a stepping stone for a jaguar trying to make it to the next area. There was no unimportant population because it all contributed to the overall species genome. This was a completely new way of thinking. Now, saving a species meant saving it range-wide. You might have to act on the ground at different sites, but you had to think range-wide. Conservationists don't think that way. That's too big a scale. It's too undoable in too many people's minds. It's too expensive. All those twos are out the window. This is what has to be done if we want a world with big cats. Then we went to that was just the start of it. Then we had to go to every single country, get all of their data, which, believe me, was not an easy thing to do in many of these Latin American countries. Get their best available data, get the satellite maps, get NASA helping us, and for every single country design what the probable corridors were for the jaguar so that we could really find it and save it. Then came all the hard work. Then came the actual work. Once we figured out, after nearly 6-7 years, of where the probable corridors were through GIS mapping, then we had to get on the ground and prove it. We had to prove that jaguars were really moving through these areas, that jaguars actually traveled this. Now, this is not easy in a corridor. All the things you do in a protected area go out the window in the corridor. Now you're moving through the human landscape. You're moving through citrus groves, cattle ranches, trying to find evidence of this cat or local knowledge saying that, yes, jaguars truly move through here. Usually our corridors were a little off, but they were not way off. We would often find evidence of where those jaguars were. We did over 100,000 interviews with local people. They would tell us where to look. They would tell us what was coming by. They would tell us if their father's friend or their grandfather had killed a jaguar when they were young. That was all evidence. And the jaguar, like other big cats, always leaves sign in their wake if you know what to look for. It'll be a fecal deposit. It'll be a urine smell. It'll be a scent. It'll be scratching of a tree. If you know what to look for, you will see that a big cat has passed there. Now, these corridors weren't just about jaguars. They never are. The jaguars were the umbrella species. These corridors were also about trying to save many other of the species of wildlife that could use such corridors, including some of the other cat species, such as the mountain lions, the ocelots, and even very, very small cats. One of the smallest Central American cats, the margay. Then I had to do what I had spent my whole life running away from, talk to people. Then I had to go back, because if this now was going to be feasible, we had to get it instituted, not only by the local people who recognized it, but by the government. Had to be top down as well as bottom up. So we worked with the local regional governments, and then we had to go right to the top. So we first went right to the top in the countries where we were most concerned that the corridor could be broken. Top of our list in Colombia. We knew if we got sign off by the president of Colombia, then other countries that would help other countries falling into place. This was a signing that happened last year with the former Vice President Santos, with the president's blessing, signing the Jaguar Corridor into place in Colombia. Last month, I was in our second biggest corridor of concern, Honduras. We proved to the country through genetics, through the science, that jaguars truly, despite how raped that country was, how jaguars still move along a corridor by the Atlantic Ocean. And the vice president and the ministers signed into law the Jaguar Corridor. This was working. Country by country, governments saw this as a win-win. We weren't usually asking them to preserve new areas. We were actually giving them a win. We could green coat them. They could sign into law existing habitat, existing community usage of land, however it was used, as a Jaguar Corridor. What that meant realistically is that if any development project came online, a dam, a 4-lane highway, a power line, and they had to do an EIA, an environmental impact assessment, that the Jaguar Corridor would pop up on the country's computers. That's all we asked. We did not say that the Jaguar Corridor should stop or even slow down any development. We just said, when it pops up, give us a shot to show you how you could do the development and mitigate the Jaguar Corridor at the same time so that the movement could still be allowed through. Now, sometimes it was just almost unworkable if it was a huge dam, but almost never was it. If a dam popped up, as it did in Costa Rica, we said fine. Now, the rest of that Jaguar Corridor that they're moving through at that point, that has to now become a higher priority. We've worked with gold mining, we've worked with dams, with roads. Development, big cats can live with people, and development does not have to be an enemy of conservation. Both of them can work hand in hand, and it becomes much easier when it's done early on, and the conversation takes place in the beginning so that things that the animals need can be mitigated, and then development can have it all. Then the governments and the companies have it all, and the conservationists have what we want. The jaguar was taken care of. I was thrilled. But what I wasn't thrilled about was the tiger. The tiger, we were losing. We were in terrible, terrible shape with the tiger. Now, the tiger had been broken up. It was not like the jaguar. There were many different subspecies of tigers, including this incredibly spectacular. This is the smallest tiger in the world. It's the only tiger with a mane. It's the Sumatran tiger. This is one of the most magnificent animals on Earth, and they're being killed and shot as we speak. This was a tough one. This was tougher and continues to be tougher than the jaguar because the killing is just happening constantly. And the poor local people who we sometimes, or some people try to say they can't be blamed for the killing, often, not always, but often are actually tied into much larger networks of people who are running illegal drugs and guns as well. Why? The why is because tiger products, and specifically tiger bone, in the Chinese medicinal trade has become one of the most valuable products on the face of this earth. Gram for gram, it's worth today more than any precious metal, any illegal drug, any gem. Tiger bone is the most sought-after product, one of the most sought-after animal products in the world. This is a picture which I took in northern Thailand. This is what the pharmacist at a Chinese pharmacy, those are tiger penises. This is a vat of tiger wine outside of Beijing, showing the people what they're getting because a full tiger skeleton is inside of the vat. These are all tiger bones. This was a tough one. Tigers are in terrible shape. They're in tiny fragmented populations scattered throughout most of their range. Saying that they have 7% or 5% of their historic range left, it's not even close. And not especially when you look at all the little fragments trying to survive. So the key was, what don't we know about tigers? Where do we know, there was still lots of area where we didn't know much what was happening. And one of the biggest places was a country called Myanmar. It took me 5 years in the mid-1990s, in the early 1990s to mid-1990s, to get into one of the most spectacular, out-of-time countries I've ever been in my life. The country of Myanmar, known as Burma, just now opening up to the outside world. But the place I really wanted to go was up in the far north, which was supposed to be filled with tigers, but no one had ever been there in nobody had ever been there surveying, looking for tigers in recent time. It took me several more years to get contact with the government and let them have me make a trek up into northern Burma, but I ended up in a spectacular valley called the Hukong Valley. And that's when I looked for the tigers, taking out camera trap teams, and we found them. Unfortunately, Burma, which should have had a lot more tigers, almost all the tigers through the years of dictatorship had been wiped out, except in this one area, except in this huge area in northern Burma. There were tigers still roaming in there. So I had to get it saved. I thought I had learned from the Jaguar now. Scale, make it big, ask for something that you just have to get. So we determined what the scale would be. I met with government officials, and in 2004, we had 2,500 square miles set aside as the world's largest tiger reserve. This was the largest protected area I had ever set up, far larger than any tiger reserve in the world. I thought I had made a major accomplishment. Again, I was smacked in the face with just how small my thinking was. Right on the heels of my accomplishment, the Myanmar Forest Department, the Director General of Forestry, calls me up in New York City and says, please come back to a meeting that we're having in Rangoon, but we're keeping it quiet. The generals, the dictators don't know about it, but we need to talk to you. Now, going to a secret meeting in the world's worst dictatorship where the dictators don't know about it wasn't something I thought was a great idea. But it was the Director General, and I tried to make sure it wasn't something really underhanded. He said, no, come, it'll be good. It's just we can't let them know because you're the only one who could do this. Okay, I went back, and what the first thing they said to me was, your surveys of tigers in Burma showed that all of Hukong Valley had tigers. So why do you want, now all of Hukong Valley is 9,000 square miles. Why'd you only ask for 2,500? Now I've never been accused by anybody of asking for too little. This shocked me. I said, why am I only asking for 2,500? First of all, you're the forestry department. Why don't you ask for more if you think that there should be more? But they couldn't. They said, we can't get to the dictators. You could get to the dictators. But I said, why would I ask for more than what I asked for? Because outside of that 2,500, while there were some of Asia's greatest grasslands still intact, along with that, were huge numbers of indigenous people, people like the Naga that killed tigers, people like the Lisu that killed everything they encountered. There was an insurgent army, an armed insurgent army with their major base in Hukong Valley fighting the government at the time in the valley. There were bridges being built, bridges of a sort, but they were bridges being built with people coming in, killing wildlife, killing bears for their bear paws, for the wildlife trade, for the Asian medicinal trade. There was gold mining opening up huge jungle areas. There was dynamite fishing. And worst of all, for our safety, there was opium growing. All of this was taking place in Hukong Valley, outside of the 2,500 square miles. And the Director General stared at me and said, "But there are tigers there, right?" And I said, "Yes." And then it hit me. If I've ever had an epiphany, that was it. They got it. They couldn't understand why I didn't get it. They got it. Conservation thinking, traditional wildlife protection was always about hard boundaries, always about locking up animals away from people. This is where the tiger lived. The tiger was out there among all this. All of our problems came from trying to aspire to some Bambi-like steady state equilibrium where the wildlife lived in harmony within a hard boundary area, and we protected them, and nothing would ever be affected. That's why we were always in crisis mode, because they never lived in harmony with people. What conservation was, what I realized it was, and what the whole conservation community needs to realize it is just like everything else in this world, it's a dynamic disequilibrium. That's what conservation must be viewed at, just like we view our everyday life as a dynamic disequilibrium, which we try to keep around a steady state, around a mean that satisfies us as people. Whether it's murder rates, whether it's quality of life, whether it's health issues, we aspire to a certain state, knowing that's not optimal, nor is it what we could get theoretically, but it's what we're satisfied with. That's how conservation has to go. Because conservation, once you look at it that way, and once I've started to, I was able to accomplish so much more. Then you can scale up. Once you realize that wildlife lives in a dynamic disequilibrium with the human world, and that nothing's a crisis, it's just variations, it's just bumps and troughs, and you do what you have to do to bring it back to that steady state. Then we move forward. Then I started working with all the people. So I took it on, bringing the generals together, bringing different tribal groups together, bringing local people together, training guards. I'm a scientist, but I've done more training and shooting than I've ever thought I would ever do. Me not doing shooting, but actually working with people doing shooting. Training up patrols who put their lives on the line and shouldn't have to be carrying weapons which are worse than what the poachers have because tiger bone is so valuable. And then eventually I did what everybody said I'd never do. Because once somebody says I can't do it, I know I'm going to do it. And that was I got to meet with then, he was called Secretary One, head of the largest military intelligence network in the world at the time, Secretary One Kin Yunt, who at the time was in total control of the Myanmar government, along with Senior General Tan Shui, who now is in control of the entire government and has taken this man down. But at the time, he was the most powerful man. I got to him, and I said, I made a mistake. The 2,500 square miles is too small. This is the only place you have tigers. You're going to lose tigers. I need the whole Hukong Valley. I need it all. He looked at me, and he said to me, he said, "Aren't you a bit scared coming to me and asking me for this much after you've just asked for 2,500 square miles?" And I said, "Yes, I am." But I said, "Aren't you scared that Burma will be the only country in Tiger Range which once had more tigers than anybody else outside of India, and you're going to lose all your tigers if this valley is not protected?" He smiled. He said, "Okay, if I do this, what about there's supposed to be natural gas in there? Some people say there's valuable timber, though we knew the timber wasn't much in there. I said none of that has to stop. You could have, this area is the size of a small country. It's almost the size of the state of Vermont. We can have our tigers, you can have development. He said, done. That's the value of working in a dictatorship. It is often extremely valuable working in a government where you can get to one person and get a done. 9,000 square miles, while it was set aside in 2010 officially by the generals, by the cabinet. At the time, while I had been waiting for them to pass it, I set up 4 more protected areas north of there, 13,000 square miles. Now the tigers had their own country. They had their own little country. Tigers could be tigers. Tigers could live the way tigers were meant to live. But I had learned from the jaguars, this is not enough. Believe it or not, as much as this had been my life's accomplishment, this was not enough. The biggest landscapes are not good enough. I knew now from the jaguars not to sell the tigers short, because if we were successful bringing them back in these core areas, they needed corridors. They needed to maintain genetic continuity. They needed to reestablish the genetic continuity with other populations. So we proposed, unlike jaguars, these corridors didn't exist in reality. But I knew they could exist, and I don't fight based on thinking I'm not going to succeed. We will succeed, and we need these corridors so that the true population of tigers are not going to be these little orange areas, but these green metapopulations here, including the largest one there in the Himalayan, Indo-Malayan area. These tigers just needed places to walk. Once we could open up some of the human landscape, they could sneak by the people without people ever knowing that they are there. Big cats can do this. It's not an easy thing. This has been a lifelong mission, and it will be until I die. And many other people are working on it. It means working with people. It means life has come full circle in order to do everything I ran away from doing. But it means if you want to save the animals, you work with the people, with development, with the governments, and it can work. It all can work. And you can get a natural world where tigers, where big cats can survive. The boy I was had found his voice. But more importantly, much more importantly, I found a voice for the animals. I think I did. At least I gave them a partial voice through my voice. I felt good. I feel good now about what the future can potentially hold for the big cats. As bad as it is out there, and it is bad, but we need a lot of help. You want to talk green? We're at a green conference. This is the epitome of green. You want to save green? Help me stop the flow of red. Help me stopping the flow of red will save the green that we were handed. We don't have to make more green, in other ways maybe, but this was put on earth with us. Our lives, you don't look at this and think, well, should I give to this or give to the cancer center? I'm telling you, they're one and the same. You want quality of life? You want good health issues for all the cultures in the world, including us in the United States with infectious diseases? You want to protect these big cats. These big cats not only create a wild that adds to our quality of life in a way I sure as hell hope I don't have to explain to many people, but beyond that, they truly protect us. They protect us by feeding into a system that makes sure things are in balance. And things being in balance means a healthy, better world for all of us. So I call on you to help put me back where I belong. And it's not here. It's out there. But I need help. I need help. I need governments. I need corporations. I need individuals putting their resources where their talk is. And I guarantee you, I absolutely guarantee you, and I don't do this lightly. I wouldn't have done it 10 years ago. I can save these big cats. I can guarantee you that your children and your children's children and generations to come will still have wild tigers and wild jaguars out there. But you got to help me on this. You got to help me with resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
My God.
You want me up here for any questions?
Well, we can't.
Good.
We can't do the questions.
Okay.
We got to get them on.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
You, look, I guarantee you, you have altered the minds of every person in this room. And I know that I speak for everybody in saying, you know, for a guy who understandably has spent a lot of his life not talking to people, we are really, really lucky that you talked to us today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow. Well, we need a drink after that, right? I mean, what a day. It's been a heck of a day. We're going to get a little bit of a break, and then we've got a heck of an evening planned. So here's the deal. We've got a break now until 6:15. At 6:15, we begin the reception out on the Dana lawn, where we can all get together, followed at 7 p.m. by dinner in the big tent that's on the Dana lawn. You won't have any trouble finding any of this. We've got 6 fabulous chefs there doing what we're calling organic bites and flights, which means these chefs do their signature dishes, each paired with wine. It's going to be a lot of fun. After that, as Brian told you about this morning, live entertainment with the one and only Chuck Leavell, Rolling Stones keyboardist, environmentalist. It's going to be a ton of fun. We will be convening the Happiness Committee at that time as well. So we'll see you all in a little bit. Have a good evening.